friends! Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to the start of a new reading vlog. So today is Sunday, April 13th. So for this week's vlog, I have some reading plans I am really excited for. I have two books that I want to get to this week, and the first one is one that has been sitting on my bookshelf for like years now, and that is Pride and Prejudice. So I'm going to be reading my first Jane Austen book this week. I don't know if I'm going to finish this week. We'll see how it goes, but I'm excited, but I'm also scared because I'm like, what if I don't like this? What if I don't like her writing? But I have seen one of the film adaptations of this, and I really enjoyed that, so I like the story, so it's just a matter of will I like it in book form. So we're gonna find that out this week. And then the second book I want to read this week that I'm just as equally excited for is Swordheart by T. Kingfisher, and this will be my first time reading a T. Kingfisher book. And I feel like this is the perfect one for me to start with because I've only heard good things of it. It sounds like a book that I'll love. And just like reading the back description of this alone makes me super excited for this. So it says, Sarkis knew that the kiss was a mistake the moment he did it. He kept doing it anyway. At first because stopping a kiss so quickly offended his sense of craftsmanship, and then because it felt too good to stop. I can't wait. So I am going to start with Pride and Prejudice first, and I have to go to work later this afternoon, so I don't know how far I'll get into this today, but I'm going to start it. And then at some point, probably a little later in the week, I'll start this one as well. So yeah, without further ado, I'm just going to go hop right into this. So Monday morning, I decided to make some bagels, and I used a recipe that I've used multiple times now. It's a super easy recipe that does not require yeast or any rising time. It requires 6 ingredients: flour, baking powder, salt, Greek yogurt, an egg, and anything you want for a topping, such as everything bagel seasoning or sesame seeds. I will link the recipe down below if you are interested in checking it out. Hi, so it's now Wednesday, April 16th, and I'm here with a reading update. So I've made it to chapter 37, page 157 in Pride and Prejudice, and I'm happy to say that so far I am thoroughly enjoying this. So before going into this, I was worried about the writing style, and I was just worried that the writing style was going to be difficult to read, and I was afraid it's going to be like on the level of like Shakespeare writing, and I haven't touched like a Shakespeare book since like high school, but I remember back then like reading that for school and it just seeming like it was a totally different language. But I'm really happy to find that this isn't like that at all. Like, it is obviously like different than from what I usually read, and it is like a little more tedious, but it's not overwhelmingly difficult. And at the point where I'm at in the book now, I feel like I've kind of adapted to the writing style and that I'm used to it. And so far in this, I've really been enjoying our main character, Elizabeth, and her along with her sister Jane are my two favorite characters of the book so far. And one of the things I've been enjoying most about this book is the relationship that Elizabeth has with her older sister Jane, and just reading the scenes with them. And I just love like how close the relationship is. And I love how Elizabeth will do anything for Jane. She really just wants her to be happy, and she's always on her side. And and she always just wants the best for her, and she's kind of also like a protector of Jane, even more so than like her parents are. And then the other part of this book that I've been really enjoying so far is the scenes and interactions between Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth. I just find their scenes so entertaining to read, and I just love their like back and forth banter. It just makes me laugh. And so those are things that I have been enjoying the most, but there are a few things that I haven't been a big fan of, and one of those is Elizabeth's mother. I just really don't like her mother, and I just find her kind of annoying. And like, all her mother is concerned with is marrying off her daughters, to the point where Jane is going to visit a potential husband's house and it's raining out, and her mother is like, oh, go there on horseback, and everyone else in the family is like, shouldn't you take a carriage? And the mom's like, no, because if you go there on horseback and the weather's bad, then he'll have no choice but to let you stay longer because the weather is bad. And then, so since she goes there on horseback in the rain, she ends up getting sick, and then her mom's reaction is like, oh, now you can stay at his house longer, rather than really worrying about the health of her daughter. And she's like, oh, it's just a cold, she'll be fine. And it's like, no, that's not okay. In contrast, though, Elizabeth is super worried about Jane, and the carriage isn't available on that day, but she walks to the house to visit her sister to make sure she's okay and take care of her. And then one other thing of this book that hasn't been my favorite is the character Mr. Collins. I just find him so boring, and there's times in this book where he just goes on and on and on, and I just find his speeches boring. So he's not my favorite. But overall, I am greatly enjoying this, and I do find, like, yesterday, a lot of times, like, when I put this down, I think about it, and I'm like, ooh, I can't wait until I have time to pick that up later. But those are all my thoughts on Pride and Prejudice for now. So today, I do want to start Swordheart. So later today, I am going to, my husband has a Wind Symphony concert, and he goes there a little bit early for a rehearsal before the concert and to help set up, and I go up with him then. So since I'll have like a couple hours before the concert actually starts, I'll probably end up reading some of this. But I'm also gonna go start this right now as well. So this was the Saturday before Easter, and I have these ricotta cheese cookies that I consider my Easter cookies, and I have fond memories of making these cookies with my mom during Easter time. So now I associate them with Easter, and I try to make them every Easter. And these cookies have a very light and airy taste. They also have a powdered sugar icing, which I dye different colors, resulting in these cookies looking like colorful Easter eggs. And I will link this recipe down below if you're interested. Hi, so it's now Tuesday, April 29th, so it's almost been like 2 weeks since I updated this vlog. And I did finish both Pride and Prejudice and Swordheart the week I started this vlog. I've just been very bad at updating this vlog. I just had like kind of a hectic week that week, so I never came back to film my final thoughts or to give any thoughts about this while I was reading it. So I am here to finally give my final thoughts about this and all my thoughts about this one so I can wrap up this vlog. So first, let's start with Pride and Prejudice. So pretty much my thoughts and how I feel about it remain the same from my last update. Like, overall, I enjoyed this. I'm happy that I finally read this. I didn't love it. I'm not sure I could like ever love a classic just because they're so different from what I'm used to reading. My favorite parts of this were, as I mentioned in my earlier update, we're seeing the relationship between Elizabeth and her older sister Jane, and seeing her relationship with Mr. Darcy, and seeing how they both overcome like their pride and their prejudice towards each other and finally start to get to know each other in the later half of this book. And I also really liked her aunt and uncle, the gardeners, who are introduced later on in this book as well. And I was also super invested in Jane's story, and I'm really happy that she got a happy ending. And I know I saw the movie, and I was pretty sure her relationship ended on a happy note, but I couldn't quite remember, so I'm happy that it did end happily for her. And her and her love interest are just really cute together, and they both seem to like genuinely have feelings for each other, so I just found them adorable overall. And while I mostly enjoyed this, some things that I didn't enjoy were just sometimes reading this, it just felt tedious. And I mentioned earlier, like, the writing style, obviously it's different from, like, modern writing, but it's not overly complicated, but still, like, since it's different, it requires me, like, more brain power to read this than, say, like, a YA or a fantasy romance book. And so there were times when, like, I'd find myself just, like, rereading sentences. Also, some words in this book were used in a different way than, like, they're normally used, like, in modern writing. So that, again, like, just made it a little more difficult to read. And also sometimes I just got tired of Elizabeth's two youngest sisters and her mother and how all they could talk about was, like, the guys in this book and going to see the captains and gossiping about all that stuff. And just at certain points, I was over that. But yeah, so those are pretty much all my thoughts on this. I am happy that I finally read Pride and Prejudice, and reading this did make me want to watch the movie. But I haven't had time to do that yet, but maybe sometime in the future I'll do that as well. Next, let's talk about Swordheart. So this was my first T. Kingfisher book that I've read, and it definitely did not disappoint. I very much enjoyed my time with this book, so let me tell you a little bit about what it's about, and then I'll share more of my thoughts. So this book follows 36-year-old Hala, and she is a widow, and her husband died years before the start of this book, and she was taken in by her uncle on her husband's side. And so she became like a housekeeper of sorts for him for years. Well, at the start of this book, he has passed away, and he has left his property and everything he had to Hala. And now the rest of her husband's family, especially her aunt, is very unhappy that Hala inherited everything from the uncle and that they got nothing. And so Hala's cousin, her aunt's son, proposes to her in the hopes that she'll say yes, and so then everything that Hala inherits will be his. But of course she says no, so they lock her in a room in the house, and 3 days goes by and they still haven't let her out of the room. And so Hala feels pretty hopeless because she doesn't really see a happy ending to the situation, because she's like, well, what if they poison me, and then what if I become pregnant, and then she'll end up being tied to her cousin Alba and just live a very unhappy life, or he will marry her and then they will do away with her or something like that. And so she decides to take matters into her own hands, and she decides that she's going to end her life on her own terms before they have a chance to do it their way. And so there's a sword on the wall in the room that she's trapped in, so she takes that off the wall and is going to use it. But then, when she pulls it out of the sheath, a man pops out of the sword. And this man is our second main character, Sarkis, and he's an immortal being that lives in the sword and is pretty much one with the sword. And whoever draws his sword becomes his master, and he has to protect them. And so now Hala is his master, so with Sarkis' help, they break out of the room and they flee the house. And so they decide that they're going to seek help from the Temple of the Rat, because in this book there are many different gods and goddesses and temples, and the Temple of the Rat is the one that is like the most logical, and they deal a lot with matters of the law. And so Hala is going to go to petition them so that she can get her inheritance that is rightfully hers. And so Hala and Sarkis start off on their journey to the temple, and our story goes from there. Now for my thoughts. So as I mentioned, I very much enjoyed this. I had a very good time with this. This book, at times it felt like a cozy fantasy, and then other times it felt like a horror, and then there was also romance in it, so really it had a little bit of everything. And I really liked the tone of this book. So this book had like serious things that happened in it, but it really most of the time had like an underlying tone of humor to it, and sometimes dark humor. And so I just want to share one of my favorite little passages from the book that really shows like the type of humor that this book has. So on page 377, Zale, who is the priest of the rat that ends up helping Hala, says to her, "You are sure that everyone means well, which is why I think you are perhaps well matched with Sarkis after all. He's sure that everyone is determined to kill everyone else in their sleep. Between the two of you, you average out to a nicely functional outlook." And so I just like found that really amusing, and also I feel like it just shows the overall tone of the book really well. And speaking of Hala and Sarkis, I really enjoyed their characters and seeing their relationship develop. So their romantic relationship is very much a slow burn one, and it doesn't really develop very much until towards the end of the book. But like the attraction between the two of them is there right from the beginning of the book, but they're trying to stay away from each other because there's other things going on. Like Sarkis is just trying to get Hala safely to the temple to get help, and Hala is just trying to sort out her inheritance thing going on, and both of them also do have like insecurities as well, where they don't believe that they are worthy of the other. And then in addition to the romance in here, there's also a very strong sense of found family. So for about the first 150 pages, Hala and Sarkis are traveling by themselves, but then after that they are joined by two other characters, and the four of them end up forming a connection, and a sense of found family forms between them. That just really warmed my heart and was sweet to read about. And then one other thing that I really enjoyed about this book was the world building. So this book itself is a standalone, but it takes place in the same world as some of T. Kingfisher's other books. Just from like the glimpses we get into the world from this book, you can tell that the world is very well fleshed out. So in this book there are multiple gods and goddesses, and so you have all the temples that are dedicated to them. And in here you get introduced to a few of them, and you get to see how the different temples operate and what their people are like, and some are really helpful, like the Temple of the Rat, while others are just made up of horrible people who do horrible things. Then one of the temples has paladins, which I know one of T. Kingfisher's other series set in the same world is her Paladin series, and you get to meet some paladins in this one, which I thought was really cool. And that is a series that I would be interested in reading at some point. I want to pick that one up too. And then also I just have to mention that there are hills in here that like move around, and they will like come to you if they want to like draw you into them. And there's just like a lot of mystery and superstition surrounding these hills, and a lot of people try to avoid them because none of the stories about them are good. And yeah, so overall, I just really enjoyed this. Like, I really enjoyed the world building, the plot, and the characters. And this is a standalone, so it did wrap up everything nicely in the end. And in the author's note, I did notice that she said she wanted to make this into a trilogy, because there are two other people mentioned in this book that also got trapped inside swords at the same time that Sarkis did. And so those other two books are going to be their stories. And so I'd be very interested in picking up those if and when they come out. Those are all my thoughts on this, so we are pretty much at the end of the video. Let me know down below if you have read either of these, what you thought about them. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye!